now that we got the spine moving a little bit, now we want to add more of the strengthening components to it by doing isometric contractions. So let's look at this lumbar compression from a sports skill perspective first to really that'll help understand the isometric contractions and why we do them. So here's compression, right? If I drive my lumbar spine into the ground, I'm only thinking about my lumbar spine right now. I'm not doing anything with my hips. When I drive my lumbar spine into the ground, my legs come up. I compress more without even using any of my hips. Okay? Now, if I try to arch my lumbar spine, my legs drop. Okay? And that has nothing to do with my hips. But by arching my spine, I'm opening up and I'm losing that compression. So some people lose that compression because they were like me. They couldn't find that full pelvic tilt and that full lumbar flexion. So their legs got very heavy and got too heavy and they start to drop. Some people, when you add the shoulder component, if you don't have enough shoulder mobility for an inversion, compensation is arching your back if you don't have enough shoulder mobility. So right there, that'll make your legs drop too. But these exercises will help let you know if it's really more lumbar flexion or if it's more shoulder flexion, or if you were like me, it was a combination of both, so I had to work on both, and I still have to work on both. But it's gotten a lot better by doing this work. Years of drilling really hard skill didn't make that skill better. It just hurt my body, but fixing the reason why I couldn't do the skill helped me fix the skill. So if you think about this concept, then you can see how important that lumbar flexion really is and how important it is to strengthen it. Because once a lot of the cues from instructors are to find that compression first. But what we really are talking about is finding that lumbar flexion. And then your legs will kick in to get you over and get you through the rest of it. Okay? So, the first way that I teach this to folks to make sure it's comfortable on the spine and they can get some good work done without it being too hard is to do it from a chair. And this looks easy, but it's not. And also, doing things easy but correctly sometimes is way more valuable than trying to do things too hard and not getting anything out of it and possibly hurting yourself or cranking on your back. So this one, people go into as much lumbar flexion, they come forward until they feel a stretch here, or they only go as far as they're allowed because of pain or pinching or anything like that. So they really could be here if that's really the most appropriate level, if this is too much. Okay, so hugging the legs. So I'm at my end range, flexion, whatever my end range might be at this time. And then I do a PAILs, isometric contraction. So I'm going to initiate starting to come out of this, but resist it with my hands. So I'm starting to try to use my spine, my lumbar spine, to come out of this. And I'm going to resist, gradually ramp up that intensity, and hold for an isometric contraction. Because my range of motion will not open up until I have strength. And then for those of you that have a lot of range of motion, you can that range of motion is only useful the amount that you can control it. So the PAILs is that isometric contraction there. And that strengthens the elongated tissue. And then, so typically we do a PAILs round, and then we do a PAILs rails round. So then we'll do that same, try to come up, and then switch to rails, which is trying to go into more lumbar flexion. So it is curling of the low abs, or that cue of thinking about pushing your spine out. So this is where, again, you could add something here to help think about pushing your back out instead of just thinking about curling abs. Thinking about curling low abs is not a cue that is useful for some people. It wasn't for me. The pushing out the back definitely helps me find my low abs a lot better. So this is one way to do the isometric contractions to start strengthening, which will then open up more range, or it'll help you just strengthen the rest of the range so that you can use it. So the chair is a good option for people because you want to build a healthy spine before you start to load it with a lot of body weight or external weight. That's when you can start to get into trouble if your spine's not ready for that. So another progression from the chair is to go into this position. So I'm using my lumbar flexion, I'm driving my spine into the back, into the floor, okay? And then I can pull myself into a little bit more passive range by pulling my knees in, that's putting myself into more lumbar flexion. Same idea as the chair. I'm gonna resist my legs, but I'm gonna use my lumbar spine to try to come out of this, resist, and do an isometric contraction. And here, for the rails contraction, I can use that cue of the floor of driving my spine into the ground, which will push my legs up to do some strengthening work. So this is a good option, but this could be too much for somebody's spine if it's not that healthy, because you're adding some more your leg weight onto the spine. So that's why the chair is useful, and then you can work towards this. And then eventually, as this gets stronger, as the isometric contractions get stronger, you can start to use those PAILs and rails to start moving your legs. So PAILs, I'm initiating transitioning out of the lumbar flexion. So PAILs, I'm using that to slow and controlled lower my legs. Rails, I'm using that for the final 5 to 10 degrees of my range. So I can start strengthening, moving with it. It's called kinetic stretch. And start strengthening it that way. So you can start strengthening these pieces. And then eventually, as I get better at these, I could go to a longer lever, which is a straight leg version. And now you see that starts to get to more of like a plow position by doing it here. But this still could be too hard and too difficult for a lot of people, so starting from here is really useful. And then you take the cues from these exercises and you start to add them to your ab exercises and hollow bodies, okay? You start to apply them. So that thought about pushing into the ground, if I start to push my lumbar spine into the ground and my thoracic spine, now I'm in a hollow. I have to use end range shoulder flexion and hip extension to maintain it. But some people struggle with hollow body because they struggle with thoracic flexion and lumbar flexion, and they've never worked on that. And I've seen people do this work and that really improved their hollow. And then taking this a step further, once you've strengthened those lower abs and your spine can now move more into flexion, ab exercises will become more comfortable and more useful. And if you think about that cueing. So if some exercises like hollow body leg raises, start to think about trying to maintain lumbar flexion as much as possible as you lower, and don't just go into an arch. A lot of people just go into an arch and then they cannot control their legs down. So try to maintain that lumbar flexion by pushing into the ground as you lower. And that's how you start to strengthen and develop control of lowering your legs. And then same idea here, drive your lumbar spine and your thoracic spine into the ground to find flexion, and that'll help you control doing a leg lift and put less stress on your back. If you're constantly, if you can't control that and you end up going into a back arch and your legs just flop down, that can be a little bit irritating on the low back, especially if you're doing 3 sets of 10 and doing that repetitively. That might accrue over time and become irritating on the spine. So those are some cues and some things to think about for lumbar flexion, which is a big part of compression, and some ideas to get you thinking about how to train this. But any spine work in a kin stretch class usually involves some of these principles, so you would learn it there.